Good day, good people. I'm Samantha Fletcher, and this is the video of the panel discussion that followed the screening of the incredible and critically acclaimed film Left Behind, a moving and must-see documentary, if you haven't seen it already, that tells the story of some students in New York City who are struggling with literacy and dyslexia, and what happened when their moms banded together to save their children when the school system wasn't doing enough. It also teaches you about what you can do and what parents and teachers out there should be thinking about. So, if this is a panel discussion video, what am I doing here and where's the panel? Good question. You will definitely get to the panel, but unfortunately, I forgot to click record right when it started. So, I'm here to give a quick introduction and share pieces of what did not get picked up. And then we'll get straight into the discussion featuring my amazing guests. Okay? All right, now time to move on from this opener and on to the panel. I will say, guess what? Technology saved the day a bit. Thankfully, someone in attendance who sat up front recorded some of the beginning on her phone and shared it with me, as what you'll see just before the remaining full panel recording. Also, something that we didn't get recorded that I want to share is something that Naomi Pena shared about shoe tying. She talked about how one common thread among the dyslexic students at the school that she helped found, a common thread was untied shoes. She noticed so many students with their shoelaces untied. Something she said was common in students with dyslexia, adding, to the fact that dyslexia is not just a reading thing like so many people think it is. So it's more than just an issue with reading and writing and letters. She added that students, as they begin learning and getting the strategies to help with their dyslexia and getting the things they need, and as their reading improved and their skills improved, she also began to see shoe tying improve as well. Fascinating. That's not to say, and you'll hear me mention this, that everybody, if your child can't tie their shoes, that means that they're dyslexic. We're not saying that, but it's very common for somebody with dyslexia to have trouble with tying their shoes. All right, with that, here are the recordings from an audience member, followed immediately by the rest of the panel discussion. Enjoy and know this: getting a dyslexia diagnosis can feel hard, okay? Getting that diagnosis as someone who is Black or brown or someone from a marginalized group, as the film addresses, can be even harder. Reach out if you have questions or need support on this journey. Okay, that's an area of expertise for me, helping you navigate this. It could be brand new for you, and it could be hard, striking, challenging, troubling. You're scared, you're unsure what to do. Reach out, all right? I'm happy to help you with that. And Siena is filled with experts on this subject, and we are all here for you. Okay, enjoy. Setbacks and how schools are identifying and supporting.
If I'm gonna be honest, I feel like a lot of people are talking about it, and the only progress I've seen personally has been with the Literacy Academy in New York City. Outside of that, I haven't seen anything. Personally, I'm still very active in the public school system, even though my son is in private school now. They said that they would start testing children that are coming into the public school system. I've yet to hear or see any initiative about it, and it's still a big thing. It's a hot topic, but the action outside of Literacy Academy, I haven't seen it, honestly.
Thanks, Fatima. That's unfortunate. What about you, Naomi?
Um, well, the thing is that these things are announced and they sound really good for PR, but people need to read the fine print. So when you saw the former mayor announce that every student's gonna be screened for dyslexia, the fine print was all kids now in New York City schools are getting screened for reading failure. Okay. They're not getting a dyslexia screener. So yes, we have now normalized across our entire system of nearly 1 million kids in New York City public schools. We're using the same sets of tests, and we're doing beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of the year benchmarks. However, so we're capturing that data. What we haven't communicated is that information to families. So unfortunately, it puts me in a really difficult situation when some principals have shared, hey, these families would be good for your school, and I call and I do the school pitch and they tell me, well, this is the first I'm hearing that my kids can't read because my teacher told me they could, or my principal never told me this. So the system as in whole is definitely testing kids. What it's not doing is telling the truth to parents, which is something that has been systemic. Yeah. They're terrified because once you tell parents the truth, the next question is going to be, what are you going to do for my child? And that is where they start getting nervous.
About dyslexia a lot. But one of the things I get when I tell people that I work at a school for students with dyslexia is, what is dyslexia? Because people think about the reversals, and that letters flip and move and words reverse. It's more than that, I've learned. And I want somebody else to speak to that. So Jacqueline, I want to toss it to you. What are some common misconceptions about dyslexia, and kind of can you talk about what it is and maybe what it's not?
And others that are experts join in, but I think the common misconception is that kids flip letters, right? That's what I thought. That's why you see that a kid's dyslexic. But it's actually a neurobiological difference. So the brain is actually wired differently for a child with dyslexia. There are connections that are not happening. And so I always describe it as like a muscle and an atrophied muscle. So you are born with a muscle, but if you never work that muscle out and you never develop that muscle and you hold your right arm behind your back forever, it's not going to develop. And so it's not that you can't learn to read, and in fact you absolutely can learn to read and learn to read highly well and effectively as a child with dyslexia, but it's not until you build those synapses, you build that connective tissue, you build that muscle. And so I always describe it as muscle because it's the easiest, but it's literally something going on in the brain where the brain wiring is not the same as a child that's not struggling with dyslexia. So Naomi, Fatima, I don't know if you want to add to that, or Raisha, you may want to add to that, but that's kind of how I explain it in the easiest way. There's different, you can literally analyze the brain, and there's the frontal lobe and different parts of the brain are not connecting in the sort of superhighway of the brain to make reading easy. And so part of what you're doing in the explicit systematic work with kids is you're building that muscle, you're building that connective tissue. And Marianne Wolf, who writes a lot about the dyslexic brain, she says for the kid without dyslexia, they need 1 exposure. For the kid with dyslexia, they need 10 exposures to learn the same thing. And so again, you're building that muscle. Anybody want to add to that?
So absolutely everything that you said, and more specifically, it's difficulty with the sound system. So it's difficulty with language, right? And that's why you see language difficulties in preschool, and a lot of those children will later have dyslexia or be diagnosed or identified with dyslexia. Once they get to school, then that difficulty with the sounds in language, they have difficulty connecting those sounds to the letters. The other thing that comes up is also difficulty with naming, so being able to retrieve language. And so a lot of times that'll impact fluency, but you may even see it in just day-to-day language interactions where a child will have a difficulty finding a word.
I was thinking about when I was teaching kindergarten, and there's a little boy who I knew something was going on. He got diagnosed later and he did have dyslexia, but he would, if he's reading a book and the word said kitten, he's just gonna call it cat because he sees, he saw the picture and he's not sounding out the words. And that also makes me think about Fatima, your son, who usually couldn't spell it because he couldn't remember. And I hear kids say, like with cat or with the letters, they'll see it, but they can't remember which sound goes with that.
That's the word recall.
Right. I have questions that I wanted to ask, but I also incorporated questions that people wrote in. So I want to share one from someone named Lauren. She said, it seems, I'm moving on to talk a little bit about what neurodivergence means, because that's also something that comes up. She said, it seems like so many people are finding out as adults they're neurodivergent, because as a young Black or brown kid, the elders only looked at those with visible learning disability as one who needed assistance. So I'm wondering if somebody can explain for people in attendance here, for people online, what neurodivergence means. And then our question is, were you all told early on that your child had signs, for signs of being dyslexic? Was it something you saw on your own as they started school? Or was it a combination of both? So somebody talked about neurodivergence and then what happened?
For me, I always knew what neurodivergence was. It wasn't named as neurodivergence since I was a child. I was diagnosed in elementary school and was on meds very early. But neurodivergence can be anything from Tourette's to ADHD to autism to anxiety to OCD. It's so many things. Okay. But another thing that we don't talk about, especially in the Black and brown community, is that just in general, neurodivergence runs in a family. So it might look odd to other people, but it could be completely normal in your family. The only reason why Adam stood out to me is I was pretty sure he's gonna have ADHD because me and all my siblings have it. However, I never seen that where there was no language. That stuck out to me. But also when it comes to neurodivergence, I'll speak for the Black community. I'm not, Latino or considered brown, but a lot of people don't want to get diagnosed, even though I got diagnosed and I was tested. I came from Atlanta, and so the community was Black, it was suburbia, it was very different, when you get your child tested, it's usually not people that look like you. You know what I mean?
Just wanted to let you guys know. So Fatima, I heard you on the points of what's happening like in the Black community. And I think a lot of that has to do with a number of things, stigmas, labels. I'm going to come back to that. And Naomi and to Jacqueline, the whole idea of shoes untied. Had anyone ever heard that before? The connection with the shoes untied, kind of a mixed thing. That doesn't mean everybody who can't tie their shoes. But it can be an indicator, right? I'm going to get back to the stigmas, the labels. Somebody named Kim sent in a question asking how is dyslexia diagnosed, and then what do we do about it? And I feel like the film was a lot about that. We know the way to diagnose it is the testing, but psychoeducational testing, as we saw, can be super expensive. The prices that we saw in the film, the 4,000, 6,000, 8,000, is that what everybody's seeing? I want to know how much it is. Yep. And why is it so expensive and difficult to access?
So I would say yes. In Washington D.C. it's between 4,000 and 6,000. In New York City, you guys could check me on it, but I'm hearing
it goes as high as $10,000 for testing for a full battery.
They're more expensive.
There's for one child.
For one child, right? And I think it's because it is about a day of testing. It's a lot of different analysis and different tests. But there is a national organization now that has worked with a bunch of psychometricians and figured out what is most important of all this testing, because it's also really hard for kids to endure so many hours of testing. And so there's actually ways now that they're starting to look at simplifying the testing, making it shorter, therefore being able to bring down the cost. So there is a bit of work being done on that, but it's not that far yet. And so right now it is still incredibly expensive. Public school systems are supposed to do the testing. But as you heard in the film, someone fought for 9 months. I fought for 6. And after 6 months, just said like, I'm done, I'll go pay for it privately because I'm not waiting any longer when I know there's an issue. About 4 months later, interestingly, when I was fighting with the school district to provide the services that the neuropsych outlined at the end, it was about a 20-page report, incredibly helpful with all kinds of different testing and helping me really understand more about our son and his brain. And then the end was 3 pages of incredibly clear, thoughtful guidance on what to do. And I brought it to the public school system and they said, yeah, we're not going to do that. What do you mean you're not going to do it? And so that kind of started. They also said that they weren't yet seeing any educational impact on my son in school. And I said, but he can't read, he can't read and his peers are going to read. So I'm seeing an educational impact. And they said, well, you can be affected, but not yet having it show up as an educational impact. So the school district would not accept our private neuropsych and decided they had to do it on their own. So they went through another whole series for my poor child getting tested to then confirm that in fact he had dyslexia, but they still weren't going to provide the services. So it's, the battle in your question of, is it continuing?
Yeah.
It's continuing. I meet parents all the time whose experiences are exactly the same as mine. And they're not able to get services. And so the fight begins. And there are things like, what you saw in the film where parents end up suing and then they get their private school tuition paid for. But obviously it shouldn't have to come to that.
Right.
The other thing I'll add to that is it can also be expensive when you go privately because they're going to go more in depth. And one of the things that we know about dyslexia is that there's a high comorbidity. So if you have dyslexia, the chances of you having ADHD is higher, the chances of you having dysgraphia or dyscalculia. So in many cases, it needs to be comprehensive in order to rule in and rule things out because even language, like if you are testing for dyslexia, you want to have a comprehensive language evaluation as well. Because when you develop an intervention plan, you have to intervene in all of those areas. Otherwise, you're not going to see the growth, especially when we're talking about those, the language component of things. And so it does get expensive. You're looking at, multiple professionals who are doing really in-depth testing. And some of that can happen in a school building, and sometimes it can't just because they may not be someone who's trained, or they may not even have the actual test in the building to do that sort of comprehensive evaluation.
And the test is only good for 3 years, by the way.
Yeah.
That's the biggest racket of the whole thing. You got to go every 3 years.
For the same, is it like the second version is like cheaper or?
No, it's the same thing all of it. Because Horatia's point, you're still doing all the tests again and you're validating what's happening.
Is it really going to change that much in 3 years? Yeah. I mean,
it can. It can. So for instance, my son, when in the movie, when you saw him, I had just gotten the neuropsych. Yeah. And then when I went literally last year, it was 3 years from that point to that time. He didn't make, he went from reading at the first grade reading level in 5th grade to being on the 7th grade reading level in 9th grade. So they're able to attest to that, but nonetheless, the issue is like these reports help justify the need that the student needs. So while on paper, like, oh, they're making progress, go back to your public school, it can justify, whoa, they made progress, but they have these deficiencies. Really prescriptive and indicative of all the things. So it actually gives you a really great portrait of the student, but it is not for the faint of heart, both in your pocket and also of your time, because it's often at least 3-4 sessions of like at least a couple of hours each time. It's long.
All right, so this makes me want to talk about dyslexia in the justice system. So the film touches on the connection between reading struggles and incarceration. To that end, I want to play a clip from an evening with Siena, like this night. We did one a few years ago when we talked with Hollywood actor and author Amir Baraka. He had dyslexia. He did not know he had dyslexia. He stopped going to school. He turned to street life, and he ended up getting arrested, right? He ends up in prison, and he details his story in his book, Undiagnosed. It's a really good book if you don't have it, haven't gotten it, but We'll play it quick.
And as you're queuing that up, there's pretty good information, as good as you can get right now, on sort of how you get data from prisons. But about 86% of kids in the juvenile system have dyslexia or other language-based learning differences. And so if you think about if you could address that on the front end, how many kids wouldn't be in the system?
That day when I rode into that prison, I knew, as I said, that I had incarcerated myself. My forefathers came by way of being forced on slave ships. I, by my own volition, said, you know what, I want to go to prison. Not directly said that, but through my actions of breaking the law, that's what I was determined to do. I was forcing my way into slavery, as well as every other man who was there outside of those who are innocent. And I believe that there are a few people there that are innocent, but the majority of us, we broke the law. And not only did we break the law, but I came to discover that a large number of the population there was in my same mind state, my same they had my same self-imposed limitations. And what I mean by that, 32 of us got on the bus, 32 of us got off the bus, and you went directly into testing. They wanted to know where you were academically, right? At a Voice Correctional Facility. And so I was 23, right at 23 going on 24, and I was reading on a third grade level. And there was only one guy on the bus out of the 32 that had a GED. The rest of us read on third, fourth, fifth, and sixth grade levels. And so I felt very comfortable amongst those men because there was nothing to be ashamed of. There was no challenges for me like it was in school. I was completely disenchanted with school. I didn't like school. At the third grade, I was cutting school. I was sleeping in the project hallways because I could not compete. I could not pass the spelling test. And no matter.
All right, so I stopped it there, but he called his book Undiagnosed, The Ugly Side of Dyslexia. And he said he did that because he'd heard about Steven Spielberg and many of these famous people who were celebrated for having dyslexia. And he said that was completely different from what was happening in the Black community. The book is really good. It's a page turner. It's hard to put it down, right, when I was reading it. But I want to address the part where he said there were 32 men, 31 were illiterate, and all heading on a bus to prison, okay? And they get off the bus, and the first thing they do is get tested. So that sounds like a place where dyslexia testing is free. This is free, so it can be paid for. Risha, can you talk about this? What is up with this? So it can be free somewhere?
Well, it can be free once you're incarcerated, yes, right? And so I think we have to, so right now there is federal legislation that if you enter the federal prison system, that you get a dyslexia screener. It's unfortunate that we cannot do that for every child who enters school. And yes, there is legislation now to do some screening, but as you can hear, it's either inconsistent or it's not even shared with families, where the family is the one who needs to act on that information, right? They're the ones who have that protective capacity for their child. I was part of that conversation, and we should have asked him how many of them were Black or brown, because I would imagine that it was predominantly Black men sitting on that bus. And that's because we have an issue with the school to prison pipeline. And some people will add in there the dyslexia to prison or confinement pipeline. There are certain groups who we do not serve well in our traditional school settings. We do not serve Black children well in our traditional school settings. We do not serve Hispanic or Latino children well in our traditional school settings, children who have disabilities, children who are living below the poverty level, children who are multilingual or bidialectical. And when you start to overlap those things, the chances of them entering that pipeline increases. For our Black children who are sitting in classrooms, someone could have looked at him. He's obviously a bright, intelligent, adult. And I'm sure those things were present when he was a child. Someone could have looked at him and said, why isn't he reading? Right. And I think that becomes the big issue. When you see a Black child sitting in a classroom, the expectations are low. And that's what I heard from my son. They told me it was okay if his reading was on the low end of average. And so they don't intervene. But when there's a behavior, they're very quick to intervene. And a lot of zero tolerance policies and just, pushing them out of the classroom. For students who are sitting in the classroom, if you're not being taught to read, it's also going to impact you, right? So it's either going to be internal, so you're going to be dealing with like depression or anxiety, or it's going to be external and it's going to be behavioral because when it's time for you to read and they call on you, you're going to drop your pencil or you're going to hit someone. And that's when a parent gets a call home. And then when you get an IEP, if you're lucky enough to get one or to get access, and I'll put luck in quotes there, it becomes one that's behavioral based. And that ends up excluding you from access to a lot of the academic goals that you should have. And that's actually written into IDEA, right? So that's written into our federal legislation. If you are diagnosed with an emotional disturbance, then that becomes your primary classification. And you will not get the diagnosis of specific learning disability or dyslexia, which falls under that. But we have an issue with mass incarceration. And so the issue is not one that's new. I will say that literacy has been a barrier to freedom since the days of anti-literacy laws when we had enslaved Africans here in the United States. And it continues to be, I would say, a very deliberate barrier to freedom for African Americans, for Black Americans, and for other groups who have been historically underserved.
Thanks. That's a lot. One of the other things he brings up in his book that I was going to get back to is the issue of labeling and the stigma, because sometimes that's a barrier because sometimes we're concerned. We don't necessarily want our child to have a label. I mean, so you have to get it in order to get the services, but that can also be a barrier in other ways, especially in the Black community. Erin, I wanted to get you in here to just talk about a little bit about the ways that you navigated anything related to label with your child, right? Was that if that was a concern for you?
Yeah, I think to some extent when I was coming into the understanding that my son was having reading challenges and deciding whether to do some testing, I did think about labeling for a little while. I was helped tremendously, and I think this is kind of a recurring theme with me, by someone close to me who didn't have language-based learning differences, but was neurodivergent in other ways. And she shared with me just sort of her experience, some of the challenges her child was facing. And I came around to thinking that, it was more like my child was, had a cut on his leg. I wouldn't be like, well, should I get a Band-Aid? What should I do? No, I would try to figure out what does he need to address this and get it addressed. And so I came around to it. She convinced me really that that he was not going to get what he needed to realize his full potential unless I got over that hump of worrying about, well, is he going to be perceived this way? Is he going to be perceived that way? Is this going to be a negative for him in some way? And I think that was very powerful, and I'm really grateful to her for that.
Can I just add to that? I just want to say, as like a professional, an SLP, someone who's worked in education reform, even having all that information, I still had that concern. I wasn't sure like how I felt about my son having a label because historically special education has been cruel to Black children. And so, I didn't want it to turn into an excuse for them to fail him. And what helped me and what helped my family get over that is trying to figure out like, how do we use this as protection for him? instead of it being a label. But that takes a certain amount of capacity, and I would add to that even a certain amount of privilege to be able to navigate the system like that. So when families come to us, and we have a lot of families that are concerned about that, we have a conversation about let's talk about your capacity, right? Because you can get the label and your child still does not get access, and that is the truth. And so it's something that you cannot navigate alone. I think that's when you reach out for support.
Yeah, thanks you both. I'm looking at time, and there's so many more questions that we could ask, comments and questions that came in, a lot around advocating, around things related to parents, ability, and suggestions for programs, public school stuff. So I want us to, maybe we need to do a part two, but for now, as we're looking at time, I want to focus on advocacy and some of like kind of what to do, and then some tips for people who might feel like they don't know what to do, who feel like they know somebody, they have a child, they have a nephew, niece, grandchild, whomever. But what are how do we advocate for students, for schools? Yeah, what do you do?
So when Adam started at the lower school, he goes to shout out to Naomi. Naomi recommended the school. Our kids go to the same school but different buildings. There are a lot of wealthy families, and there are not that many Black people, so everybody's very interested in how you found the school. Like, how did you get in? It's not direct, but it's there. And something I learned while he was there, it took us about, let me see, he went last year to this doctor, but I heard about this when he's in third grade. He's now in sixth grade. And she told me that they found out her child was dyslexic from a behavioral pediatrician. So I went to my pediatrician and I asked for this. It was a long waiting list. Okay. We waited years. So I told you it's third grade. So he didn't go until like this past summer, August, like 2025. We went to NYU. It was paid for by Medicaid at that time. And they sat with him for hours, and she did the testing for everything under the sun. Like when I say everything, everything under the sun. And now she sees him once a year. And she wrote a letter recommending what his IEP, because last year Aden got diagnosed. I think I'm sorry, I don't want to butcher your name. Risha said there's comorbidities and dyslexia. So Aden is on the spectrum, and nobody believed it. So when your kid starts learning, you start picking up new things. And that's why you need new testing. So we went to a different hospital and we got this separate testing. So I brought all the IEPs, all these different niches of tests to NYU, and she sat with him for 4 hours. And on that floor, even though it's for that, they have x-ray machines and it's all for these children that are behavioral. But when most people hear about behavioral, you would go if your child is, let's say they have puberty too early, they're growing too fast, they're not growing enough. You also go to a behavioral pediatrician. And a regular pediatrician is more so like it's a prophylactic, it's a precaution. It's not a specialist. So when your child is not hitting milestones, you would go to a behavioral pediatrician, and that deals with the whole body, including the brain, and you can get insurance to cover that. So yeah, that's my tip. That's my tip.
I would say, as parents, for all the parents that are here, you know your child and trust your intuition, and it is a journey. My child's kindergarten teacher, I went 3 times and said, he doesn't know his alphabet. And I have all those magnets on the fridge, and I have all those spongy things in the bathtub. And I read to my child every night. And I've been reading to him since the day he was born. And I do all the stuff, right? Yeah. And my kid doesn't know his alphabet. So I think something might be off, and I don't know. And she said to me, he's a boy. He's a late bloomer and just needs to be patient. Yeah. And my second meeting was sort of the same. By my third meeting, I was like, I don't know. And then first grade happened, and the same thing. And I went to the teacher, and she said, he's just fine. He's a boy. And then I brought my husband, and it got worse because she signaled to my husband that I was one of those like overstretching kind of neurotic moms, and put him in a position where he was kind of like, why don't you trust the teacher? And I said, because I know they're wrong. And then I had to go do my own research. So there are also like understood.com has incredible resources. Child Mind Institute has incredible resources. Yale Dyslexia Center. So I just started Googling and going and then started figuring out. Now, not everybody should have to do that, but trust yourself would be my first tip to parents. If you think something isn't quite right, start asking questions. And if the teachers think it's all fine, don't necessarily trust that, because I went through 2 years of them saying everything was fine and it wasn't. But it was only because I kept thinking they're not right. I'm right. And pushing and pushing. I mean, I love the film. This is my 4th time to see it and I still get chills.
Right.
I get tear up now. I still get chills every time I watch Naomi and Fatima and Ruth and all of them fighting for their kids. And it takes a fight still, and it's so exhausting, and it's such a journey. And at the end of the day, sadly, it's the parents that make it happen. And the school should be making it happen, but they're not. And one other quick thing I would say, just to kind of put this in even a broader context, is we know that between 15 and 20% of children have dyslexia. All people around the world, but if you think about it as in the sense of a child, and so you might think like, oh, then about 20% of our population wouldn't be reading well. But actually 70% of our American children are not reading at grade level in 4th grade. So it's not just a dyslexia problem, it's a massive system failure that we don't teach reading right in this country. And if we taught reading right to all kids, a lot of our dyslexic kids would be helped earlier and faster. They would still probably need a higher dosage and more frequency of support, but they would be so much better off if they got the instruction that all kids actually should be getting. And so that's kind of a bigger fight that I often talk to people about, is we don't need to just fight for the dyslexic kids. We need to fight for the whole system to teach kids how to read properly, because then all the dyslexic kids will be helped more as well.
I want to also sort of, as we wrap, to think about from the bright spots that you've seen since people have gotten support, and kind of touch it on what you, Jackie and Fatima were, or Jacqueline and Fatima were saying, that you're sharing tips based on things that you learned, and share tips based on, and Erin, I can start with you, based on some differences that you're seeing or that you've seen since you've gotten support, and anybody else. What tips can you share? Because once we don't know the dyslexia magic pill. We had time. I'll be like, what is the magic pill? Like, what is happening? And that y'all are like breaking through. But now that you've seen some results, what are some tips you might share?
Yeah, I don't know if this is a tip or an observation. It's kind of a tip. When I was searching for schools for my son, when I realized he was at a tremendously great school, right? But they couldn't possibly meet the needs he had. It wasn't through lack of interest or desire, just, they didn't have the resources or skills and abilities. And when I was searching for schools, I'm trained as a Black parent to look for representation in terms of, I'm looking for diversity, racial diversity.
Yeah.
I wasn't looking for other kinds of representation. And I would say, if I were looking now, I would be looking for that. One of the things I happen to look up on at the school where we are here at Siena School is there are quite a number of our faculty and staff who are not like, oh, well, I'm trained to work with students with language-based learning differences. They are, but they also, a lot of them, there are at least 3 I can count that are alumni of the school that are my son's teachers. There are other teachers that also have dyslexia. So they're not like, oh, here's the tool that you can use, students. No, it's like, I have walked in your shoes. They're modeling success as a dyslexic adult who is highly successful, accomplished, sought after in their profession. And that's something that I cannot do because I don't have language-based learning differences. So that's something I would say, if you're able to look for when you're searching for schools or specialists, find somebody who, maybe not everyone your child works with, but find some people who also can model that success and have walked in their shoes.
I would say the good news is we 100% know how to support dyslexic children to be able to read effectively. My child started second grade, 2 full grade levels behind. He didn't know his alphabet. He finished third grade on grade level. And we did what it said to do, right? Like we know what to do. And so if you can get whatever it takes to fight for it, we actually know. We know the dosage they need, we know the frequency, we know the programs, we know what a dyslexic kid needs to become a proficient reader, and they absolutely can. And so it's really a playbook. And I would say get people to help you know what that playbook is and then fight for that playbook because we know it works. And it's a really, I mean, all of you in this room, I'm sure, are very connected to this issue, but it's a really, really painful journey in the beginning when you're not sure it's ever going to work and you're worried it's never gonna, your kid's never gonna have success and your kid is struggling, you know, depressed, anxious, sad, feels stupid.
Right.
And that's a journey that they have to go through and get emotional support on. But because we know what to do, then fight to make sure it happens.
Sure. Great. Naomi or Risha, do you want to add any tips before?
I guess I'll give more of a piece of advice than a tip because I think everyone has or the speakers so far have given some really good tips. I would say that dyslexia, you know, like we start from the beginning, it's neurobiological. So it's a lifelong journey and it does not go away. It will change depending on access to intervention, but there's always going to be some things that kind of persist. And so it's really important. Start off by, you know, doing everything you can to protect your child's identity as a learner and as someone who can later become an advocate for themselves, but also as a parent, pace yourself because it's all the way through until they get to career and until they can advocate for themselves. Build a team of support. And so I'm not going to go too deep into it, but you can reach out to the Dyslexia Alliance for Black Children. We have parent-to-parent mentorship. So like a lot of the questions that are being asked here, we can walk you through some of those things and help you find resources in your community and connect you with other parents in your community as well. So definitely reach out to us for more.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I mean, I guess it's gonna piggyback off of what Risha said. I think we need to stop pretending, and this happens in communities of color all the time. You know, we're kind of conditioned to say, you know, you don't talk about what happens in the house outside of the house. And we need to stop doing that because when you do not talk about it, you are effectively isolating yourself and you are limiting what information you can access. So when I got the call from Fatima, because someone connected her to me, because I have been raging about my experience for years, you know, I was able to hear Fatima, you know, calm her down because it's very emotional and tell her it's going to be okay because it doesn't feel okay. And then just like it was said, this doesn't, you know, it kind of, I cringe when people say, you know, I overcame dyslexia or I had dyslexia. No, boo boo. You have it for life. It doesn't go away. It is not, you had it. And I love that you think it's a superpower. Great. But you know, like literally I had emailed Samantha because I had to take my daughter to urgent care and they were like, where is it hurt on your throat? And she was like, uh, my left. And she was like, wait, hold on. Because she has a hard time with right and left. And I was like, she's dyslexic. And she's like, you know, she can play it off, but this doesn't go away. She loves reading books, but she still has a hard time on identifying where her right and left is. So I think we need to learn as a community that we need to say things so we can find our people and our people that are going to support us because closed mouths don't get fed.
There you go. All right. Well, we will again now looking at time. I will wrap on that. I would love to ask if anybody has anything, but I see what time it is. And I don't want to hold people a lot longer. I want to say thank you to everybody. I know I've heard us talk a lot about like the disparities racially and thinking about marginalized groups and dyslexia. And it was important for me as the director of the DEI department to have this conversation because everybody at the school has dyslexia or some language-based learning difference, but it doesn't affect everybody the same way. And so I think it's important to lift up what you all were saying about what Black and brown children are facing and how it's different. And some people who are watching or some people here who are at a school that's not a school that's specifically for dyslexia, you may have a kid that is really withdrawn, or you may have a kid that's been acting out. Where is that? What do they look like in terms of literacy? Like, how much are we checking in that area? Because sometimes we're quick to just think that they just are somebody who misbehaves. Well, what is it? What other things that we need to be thinking about? So I will stop there. I want to say thank you to seeing people as I see on the screen, Naomi, Risha, Fatima. Thank you to Aaron. And thank you to everybody here for coming out. And we will have to do this again sometime. Y'all have a good night.
Thank you.
And also, I'll share a question that was asked by a participant who came up to me directly at the event, and I'll share my response because it's beneficial. So the question was, why is DEI needed at schools like this? Like, is it needed? And if the school is already created to address a specific challenge, is a DEI person necessary? Absolutely. For one, so for many students, landing at a school like ours is the best thing for them academically, though it may mean trading one identity for another. Okay, so for example, oftentimes students go to a dyslexia specific school after being in schools where they were maybe one or two in a classroom of 20 or more who were struggling with reading. They felt like an outsider. At a school like Siena, everyone has dyslexia or some form of language-based learning difference, and so students feel at home in that regard. They are among people with similar learning profiles and dyslexia identities. However, what did they give up? What did they trade? Some come from schools where, though the majority of the other students did not have dyslexia, they may have shared with them, they may have shared a common religion, if it's a religious-based school, race or ethnicity, if it's, say, a predominantly Black or Hispanic school, or gender at, say, an all-girls school. They were getting religious or cultural or gender-related needs met, but struggled academically. Once they go to a dyslexia school, per se, they begin to get academic and learning needs met. But often, unintentionally, those cultural aspects of their identity do not get as much attention or nurturing. Okay, so that's one. Two, another example. Oftentimes, schools like the ones I've been talking about have demographics where people from marginalized groups tend to be the minority of the population. Okay, so the spaces are open to all, they're welcoming. To put that into context, though, once I interviewed Dr. Tony Jack. He's a Harvard professor, former Harvard professor, and the author of a book called The Privileged Poor, which is about institutions with student demographics, like I've mentioned. He pointed out that when such institutions say they are welcoming to all, they mean well, but for some, it can be like welcoming a vegan to a Southern barbecue. Okay? I thought that was an interesting analogy. It's like welcoming a vegan to a Southern barbecue. And he said what that means is there will be components, right? That person will have components, laughter, talking to other guests at the barbecue, having some tasty drinks. But between all the variety of meats that are often at a Southern barbecue, as well as the vegetables that have meat cooked in it, or other sides that have cheese and butter and things cooked in them, the guests actually won't be, the vegan guests, right, won't actually be able to eat much of anything or to participate fully. So in that analogy, certain parts of them are getting fed and attended to, while other parts may not be, even with good intentions. Okay, so to bring that back to the dyslexia related schools, a DEI person can help make sure the whole picture is attended to. Okay, so think of my role as something like that. There was another question about tuition and resources and affordability, because this journey can get expensive. The Siena School website talks about the many ways to make the journey of supporting your dyslexic child affordable. Our website is this sienaschool.org. But specifically for this page, if that's what you're wondering about, you go to the sienaschool.org/admissions/tuition.cfm.